Like I said, I volunteered for Vietnam. No political reason or other. What happened was there was 3 of my roommates in Germany were rotating or going back home, and I said, "What am I going to do here? There's nothing else to do except drink beer, you know." Yeah, they went home, and when they left, I said, "Well, the only one place I ain't seen yet is Vietnam." Like I said, I didn't know political, no spiritual, no any other kind of reason why I went. I arrived in Vietnam February 2nd, 1968. Tet Offensive started on that day or the day before, and they had all kinds of stories there where, Long Binh is a replacement station. They tell me guys were hiding under mattresses, and because the Viet Cong, they come under the storm drains and stuff and breach the barracks, you know. And they tell me all these stories. I said, what the hell did I get myself into, you know? My unit was out in the field when I went over there, when Tet started. And I spent about a month back in the field until they needed me to go back out there. I mean, don't get me wrong, there was times when I was scared, you know? I didn't care, but as a combat medic, you gotta be like a husband, a wife, a boyfriend, a girlfriend, all that kind of stuff, all personal stuff, you know. Guys get stressful.
Dean, he taught us to paint abstract and specifically your feelings and your emotions and how you feel. And so in the class, we pick a color, pick the colors on how you're feeling. They represent your mood. So I chose the green here and the brown here, and so it felt like crap. And I felt like just bombing. I was in just turmoil. So we just let the paint go into water, and wherever it went, it went. And then we would unfocus our eyes. You know, you can make everything blurry. I unfocus my eyes, and your mind still wants to create sense of what it sees. So when looking at what I had made, I saw that first casualty evacuation that I brought in. The Marine that I had met at the helipad was a black Marine. His hands became all the desert sands of Iraq, and I went back in afterwards with the charcoal, and I put us in there. I made myself much taller, so it's kind of cool. But and I wasn't carrying him in the real. He was on the stretcher. But that enabled me to then talk about that experience and drag it out and process what actually had gone on during that time, and then able to talk about the other ones that I also, didn't want to think about. So when that realization occurred to me, like, hey, I'm able to talk about this experience now. I talked to the other students in my class that were also veterans, and they had varying degrees based on buy-in that they were, putting into the workshop that we were doing, but they all had positive outcomes from it. And so that's when I decided to start the Warriors Art Room. I said, I don't know when this is going to be, but I need to bring this to other veterans, at least this workshop.
I had no idea that I was a caregiver. I never thought of myself of having that label. I was just a devoted wife. That's how I saw it. I had no idea what was going on. I was absolutely clueless. And this stress went on for several years, and finally one day my body gave out. And the psychiatrist said to me, Lisa, I gotta explain something to you. You will be no help to anyone if you don't recognize that you're dying, and you need to change what you're thinking about and fight to live. Being a caregiver is not easy. Caregiving can kill. And I'm an example of that. I almost died.
To get you to that mindset that if you are told to do something, you don't question it, you do it. And there's a reason for that. because if you're out in combat and somebody says, hit the deck, you better do it because there's a reason. So that's why they're tough on you. And I think it was a good thing because it teaches you to interact with the people that you're with, to start to rely on them as they should be able to rely on you. It's it's a two-way street.
So, when you were in basic training, were you completely segregated in terms of people of color and?
The service was not segregated. So I had a roommate who was a black lady, a gal, and we were fine, we had no problem. And a lot of times I had a car. If I was going downtown and she was going downtown, I'd give her a ride. Well, the air policeman at the main gate turned me in because that was a very risky thing to do. Because the only way that she was able to ride in my car was sitting in the back seat as a servant capacity. So that was how, that was how we did it. So I had to stop taking her down. And my base commander called me in. And, he said, I realize you're not from here. And this is not the way you are used to things. But he said, you cannot do it. It is too dangerous. So I had to stop giving her a ride. But then we had some time off. And she said, well, I have an aunt in Savannah, Georgia. And I said, okay, let's go see her. So we got the chow hall to give us food. So we didn't have to stop because now we're in a situation that could get bad, And we drove at night because then people would just see two people in the car. And we got down there and they were really, really nice. And we stayed over, a couple of days with them and then went back. And it was a nice trip.
I had retired from the Army. I was working at the U.S. Marshal Service, and I was on my way to a meeting. And I had to go outside and walk over to the Metro in Crystal City in the Washington, D.C. area. And as I was walking into the Metro, I saw an elderly man trying to light a cigarette. I mean, he was shaking, sitting down on a bench. So I went over to him to see if I could help him. And by then, he had the cigarette lit. I saw that he was wearing a World War II cap. I thanked him for his service. Obviously, he was a veteran because it said World War II veteran. And while thanking him, I noticed that he had a 4th Armored Division patch or pin on his cap. So I asked him, were you with the 4th Armored? And he said, yes. I said, well, what did you do? He said, I was the company commander of Alpha Company, 8th Tank. And I said, oh, well, that was Al Ertzig's outfit. And he said, yeah. What do you know about the 4th? And I said, well, my father was in the 4th Armored Division. He was a liaison pilot. And that's all I said. And this man started talking. And he said, oh, those Grasshopper pilots were amazing. I remember one day we had there were 2 Panzers behind a barn, and we were trying to get by them. So we called in the artillery. And the way the artillery worked was that a spotter plane, the L4, would come over, look, and then call in the coordinates. And he said, the next thing I know is this Grasshopper, it's what they called the L4, came over the trees, and he said, in his words, and the son of a bitch had bazookas on his wings. And he fired one of them, hit the tank, turned around, came back, fired at the other one, hit it, and flew away. And I said, how many bazookas did he have? He said, 2, I told you. I said, well, he could have had more. He said, no, this guy only had 2. Well, my dad was the only one in the 4th Armored Division to have 2 bazookas on his wings, just 2. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking, 60 plus years later, I'm talking with a guy that's telling me a story about my dad. So the first thing I did, pulled out my cell phone, called my dad, and said, "Hey, Dad, I've got somebody here I want you to say hi to." He was 4th Armored Division. Didn't tell him the story, didn't tell him anything else, because I knew I didn't want to taint this. So I put him on and they said hi to each other, and I was liaison pilot, and I was with the 8th Tank and all that stuff, and they just said hi, and that was it. And later on that evening, I'd been thinking about it the rest of the day. I called my dad and said, "Do you remember a time when there were a couple of Panzers behind a barn, and there was a fire mission? Do you have any recollection?" He said, "Oh yeah, I remember that." I said, "Well, tell me about it." And he said, "Yeah, we got the fire mission, 2 Panzers behind a barn, and I flew over and saw, so I fired the bazooka, turned around, fired the second bazooka, and thought, what the hell am I doing here? They're shooting at me." So he said, I flew, he always flew low over the trees, and then he went in to call a mission. He said, and the mission was canceled. I said, "All right. Do you know why it was canceled?" He said, "No, we didn't ask those questions." He was on to the next mission. I said, "Well, it was canceled because you hit both tanks." And he said, "I've told you before, I don't think I ever hit anything." I said, "Dad, you hit both tanks and you killed one of them. The other one was not killed." He said, "Well, how do you know?" I said, "Because the guy I had you talk to today was telling me the story. And when he told me that you killed one tank, I said, 'Well, how do you know he killed it?' And he looked at me like I was stupid and said, 'That was my job. I had to know those things.'" And again, I'm thinking 60 plus years later, I'm hearing this story. So as I started to think about this more and more, I decided that my dad and this guy needed to get together. Well, I was, shocked enough that I didn't get his name or anything. So I called the 4th Armored Division reunion committee and eventually figured out this must be Len Kiley. So it took me a while to get a hold of Len, but I did, and asked him if he would be interested in meeting up with my dad. I had arranged with my dad's wife, Karen, to do all this without letting my dad know. A couple reasons for that. One is I wanted the surprise, because that's always fun, and we do that in our family.
Yes, we do.
We do a lot of fun things. Yeah. So, and the other is I didn't know if at the last minute it was going to fail, and I didn't want him to be disappointed. And we walked into the house. I walked into my dad's house first, and he said, "Well, hi. Didn't expect you here." And then Len and Lee walked in, and my dad figured out right away this must be the World War II veteran. It's important to note, though, that my dad was pretty ill at the time, and he was taking a lot of medication. And we all believed that he was suffering from dementia, that he was losing his mind, which was the one thing that scared him more than anything else. He wasn't afraid of dying. He wasn't afraid of a lot of things, but he did not want to lose his mental capacity. He was very smart, knew a lot of stuff. That was his fear. And we all saw that was happening. So anyway, he and Len talked for a while, and we just had a nice visit. They spent the night. And the next day, I flew Len and Lee back to Boston and thanked them. And there's a whole lot more to that story about Len and how it changed his life, affected his life too. It was a good visit, but it was clear in watching them that there's a lot of things my dad didn't know, didn't remember. I mean, we knew that he was suffering from dementia. Well, we found out sometime later, and I don't know exactly when, that his mental faculties were being robbed by the medication he was taking, not for something else. So one of his doctors changed his medication and told him it would take about 6 months to really see an effect. And it did. And in 6 months, I remember telling my dad, "Welcome back." He was there again. So I also knew that I needed he and Len to get together again. So we got in the plane, my dad, Karen, and I, and flew up to Maine, where Len had a cabin. And we spent the weekend at that cabin. But this time, I was smart enough to bring a tape recorder. And all the times Len and my dad were talking, including when some other people were in the room, I had recorded. And they talked about the incident with the barn and the two Panzers. They talked about Second World War, their experiences, talked about their families after, the impact, the experiences on their families. And it was just great to hear two combat veterans talking about what they did and the impact on their lives.
Yeah, and from my perspective, and I think Dad was much more open about, he didn't talk a lot about the war, but he said basically he only had 2 regrets at the time, and one of them was, he described the incident with the tanks and just said, I don't know whether I hit anything. I really wish I knew.
Yeah.
So when that came forth, it's like,
This is the validation.
This is amazing.
Yeah, it really was.
Yeah.
I'm thinking,
Yeah.
And as I raised my boys, everybody has a story. I mean, you know your story and you know some others and you look up to them, like Dad looked up to Lindbergh. But everybody has a story. And if you just reach out to people and listen, you learn so much. And if you're just kind to them, it pays back in huge dividends. I mean, I saw an elderly man trying to light a cigarette. Had I not gone over to see if he needed some help, none of this would have happened.
Right.